Hey guys! Tonight we're wandering into the warm, glowing heart of Renaissance Murano, a quiet Venetian island where fire dances behind ancient brick walls and soft breath shapes glowing glass into goblets. Beads and impossible beauty. You're here not to command the flame, but to listen to it. No yelling, no grand gestures, just soft footsteps, molten whispers, and the rhythm of breath drawn through iron pipes. It's a world where the temperature never dips below slightly sweating through your linen, and yet no one complains, because the alternative is shivering through a Florentine winter with nothing but wooden cups. You, lucky dreamer, have been granted rare access to the island's sacred furnaces. Just don't ask too many questions. These people guard their secrets like misers with gold teeth. You'll learn what you're allowed to know, just enough not to accidentally inhale powdered manganese. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your location and your local time in the comments so we can all whisper across time zones together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just before dawn, padding softly across cobbled streets that smell of salt air and scorched pine resin. Murano is waking up slow. As always, just a few sleepy gulls, the slosh of canal water against stone, and the occasional distant clink of metal against brick. You stop at a thick wooden door with a lion's head knocker. This is where your apprenticeship begins. Inside, the workshop yawns open, dim and massive. The air is thick with warm dust, smoke, and something faintly acidic, perhaps the ghost of old soda ash. A lone window throws honey-colored light across the floor, illuminating shelves stacked with finished glass long-necked vases, delicate goblets, a tiny unicorn curled into itself, all shimmering like captured breath. The main furnace dominates the center. Locals call it il cuore, the heart. It glows like the belly of a sleepy dragon, its arched mouth open just enough to let the heat spill out in waves. You approach with caution, feeling your skin prickle as you draw near. The temperature around 100 degrees Celsius, hot enough to instantly incinerate any bad decision. Historians still argue whether the earliest Venetian glassblowers copied techniques from the Islamic world or the Byzantines, but by the 15th century, Murano had made glass its own silent religion. They didn't just blow bowls, they composed music with fire. You're handed a heavy apron and a coarse linen cap to cover your hair. You quickly learn the cap's less for style and more for preventing your sweat from sizzling straight into a glass vase. Your first job watch, and not just with your eyes, with your skin, your ears, even the soles of your feet. The master craftsman, or maestro, leans on his long pipe and gives a small nod toward the batch, the sandy mixture that will become glass. It's mostly quartz sand, but also a peculiar blend of soda ash, chalk, and fragments of broken glass called cullet, recycled failure, reborn, a soft scoop, a quiet pour, no ceremony. The batch is shoveled into a crucible at the furnace's center. The sand won't turn to glass right away. It'll stew for hours, slowly, slowly. The transformation isn't fast. You're not baking bread. You're unraveling the bones of a mountain. You sit on a wooden bench, watching as the surface of the mix begins to collapse inward, like a tired pudding. The color deepens from dusty white to gold, then orange, then a violent red. Eventually, it will flow like thick honey, a state called molten, and still. The maestro waits. A nearby apprentice quietly adjusts the damp floor with a broom made of willow twigs. The air needs to be clean. Even a single speck of ash could leave a scar inside the next goblet. You never realized glass was so fussy. One fringe theory you overhear suggests some early Venetian artisans may have whispered spells into the furnace, more habit than magic. Perhaps, but a superstition passed down. Some say the fire understands respect. Others say it's just a very persuasive metaphor for anxiety management. You won't be whispering spells just yet, for now. The maestro hands you a thin rod, not yet the fabled blowpipe, but a punty, a shorter iron rod used to stir the batch gently. You step forward, holding your breath against the radiant heat, and give the mix a slow swirl. It resists. It's thick, angry, alive. You keep stirring, sweat rolling down your neck. Finally, the mixture yields a little, like an old man shifting in his chair. The maestro grunts approval. Later that morning, a finished goblet cracks in half with a sad ping. Too cold, too soon. Another apprentice retrieves the fragments, sweeping them into a box labeled future attempts. The maestro just shrugs. Glass remembers everything, he murmurs, even your impatience, by now. Your cheeks are pink, and your eyes keep wandering to the still glowing batch. You're beginning to see it less as a product and more as a conversation partner. You don't command it. You coax. You listen. You nod politely when it bubbles back. As the workshop begins to bustle, quietly, always quietly, you realize this is how each day begins. Not with fanfare, not with lectures, but with heat, patience, and an unreasonable amount of respect for what is, essentially, really fancy sand. You step closer to the furnace, feeling the heat radiate in soft pulses against your skin. The arches of brick rise above you like silent sentinels, each one preserving the secret of 1,000 glowing days. The floor beneath your boots is rough flagstone, soot darkened by centuries of ash. You lean in, noticing how the fire's core shifts from bright orange to near white as iron tools glide in and out. This is Il Camino, the path of flame and ash that turns raw ingredients into something almost alive. You learn that the furnace must maintain a temperature between 150 degrees and 1,250 degrees, hot enough to keep glass fluid, yet cool enough to preserve its clarity. Too low, and your batch solidifies into a useless lump. Too high, and you risk vaporizing precious sodium into the air. The maestro tunes the heat in a way that feels more musical than mechanical. You run a gloved hand over the surface of the brick, just below the arch, where it's warm but not blistering. You can almost taste the mineral tang in the air, a mix of silica, lime, and soda ash. This combination is no accident. Venetian glassmakers perfected the formula in the early 1400s, using river sand from the Venetian lagoon to ensure purity. Their methods spread across Europe within decades, though Murano's furnaces remained unmatched in brilliance. Historians still argue whether Venetian supremacy over places like Bohemia was due more to raw materials or to the island's strict guild regulations. But the result was the same Murano glass shone like captured sunlight. A quick joke flits through your mind. If these bricks could talk, they'd probably complain about being too hot under the collar. Another joke you swallow before it cracks the hushed atmosphere. Short silence. You remember the crackling goblet from earlier, Be respectful. The maestro gestures toward a small opening in the furnace's side. This is the glory hole. Though no one sings here, it's where a gather of molten glass is reheated between shaping steps. You lean forward, peering inside. You can see a soft pool of glowing liquid, like a miniature sun trapped in clay. You imagine the brilliance if you dared squint directly at it. Instead, you watch the reflections dance on the iron tools laid out nearby. You pick up a long-handled shovel, more a flat iron paddle than a shovel, and slide it under a crucible. The weight is surprising. Molten glass, once loosened, can weigh as much as a sleepy cat. You gently slide the crucible out, pivoting on one foot, and nestle it into the glory hole's embrace. Sparks drift upward in quiet arcs. You catch one in your peripheral vision and flinch. It disappears. The apprentice beside you murmurs that the flame here reaches nearly 1,300 dirgen spots. You nod, swallowing the lump in your throat. That's invisible hot. Fun fact, glass actually burns if it gets hot enough. Don't try grilling s'mores here. The interior of the furnace is lined with chamotte, a coarse, heat-resistant refractory made from crushed brick and clay. You run your gloved fingertip along the edge of the glory hole's rim, feeling the slight roughness. It's surprising how tactile this place can be. Everything vibrates gently with the furnace's hum, like the deep purr of a great beast. A fringed tale drifts through your mind. You once heard that some Venetian masters rubbed a drop of olive oil on the rim of the glory hole as a token of respect to the fire spirit. No proof, probably superstition. Still, you catch yourself pausing, hand hovering above the rim. Respect, after all, can't hurt. You step back to let the maestro remove the crucible. He uses long iron tongs to lift it free and rotate it with precise flicks of his wrist. You watch the molten glass inside twist into a glowing blob. Thicker in some areas, thinner in others. It's alive. If you watch too long, you might swear it breathes. A sudden hiss interrupts your thoughts. A small jet of steam escaping from a dropout of moisture hitting the furnace wall. The maestro sighs, and for a second you glimpse a flash of irritation. Even masters lose patience. You grip your apron, resisting the urge to wipe sweat from your brow. The sweat would only sizzle. Instead, you tilt your head and listen. Glassblowers speak of the furnace's voice a low, constant roar, punctuated by metallic clinks and occasional whistles. You close your eyes, letting the symphony wash over you. It's oddly soothing, like distant thunder on a warm night. You imagine yourself on a velvet cushion, lulled by those vibrations. A sudden light joke escapes you as you pretend the furnace is humming a lullaby. You quiet yourself immediately. Light, soft, appropriate. The maestro glances over with approval. You've learned to cough quietly here. Loud noises are sacrilege. He taps the crucible. Metal meets metal in a muted thud. That's the signal. Time to gather. He hands you the blowpipe, a hollow iron tube nearly 2 meters long. Your heart races. This is your first real gather. You step to the glory hole, insert the pipe's end into the molten pool, and give it a slow spin. You feel resistance, the glass gripping the pipe like cold honey on a warm spoon. The pipe feels surprisingly light at first, then heavier as the gather grows. You pull it free with a gentle twist, stepping back. The glowing gather hangs from the pipe's tip, wobbling ever so slightly. You steady your breath. Underneath, the metal of the blowpipe feels almost too hot through your gloves, but you hold firm. You position yourself to blow long, steady breath. The glass expands, the glow intensifying. Time slows. You count in your head. 1, 2, 3. The gather puffs out into a perfect sphere, held at arm's length. You smile, remembering the maestro's words, "You're not blowing air, you're blowing grace." But then the sphere sags slightly. You panic. You twist the pipe to compensate. The sphere wobbles. You catch it with trembling fingers of hot metal. You nod at it, silently apologizing. The wobble stabilizes. You exhale a shaky laugh. Smooth save. The maestro claps once, softly, and the other apprentices glance your way. You step back, placing the gather into the glory hole's glow for a quick reheat. You've made it this far. You lean against a wooden post, wiping a bead of sweat from your temple with the sleeve of your linen shirt. Steam rises where it touches. You remember the velvet cushion thought. You chuckle inwardly. From here, you can see the gentle arc of Venice's skyline through a small window, terracotta rooftops, church spires, and the faint silhouette of gondolas. It's a reminder that this workshop floats, in a sense, on water. Murano itself is one long raft of glowing creativity. You place your blowpipe down on the rack, careful to set it on the iron brackets so it doesn't roll. As morning light filters in, you realize the furnace's heat has become part of your rhythm, your breath, your heart. Even your sweat is measured by flame. This is no longer just a furnace. It's a living companion, requiring constant attention, gentle coaxing, and unwavering respect. You still can't sing here, but you're starting to understand how to hum. You're handed the blowpipe again, but this time it's for keeps, at least for the next phase. Your fingers fumble at first. The pipe is heavier than you remembered, or maybe your muscles are just learning new ways to be sore. Either way, the maestro gives you a curt nod, the Renaissance equivalent of, "Don't drop that," the blowpipe. You quickly learn, is no ordinary tool. It's a precise extension of your body, a 1.5-meter iron wand through which you're expected to perform glass alchemy using only your breath and nerve. It's hollow, narrow, and deceptively light until there's a glowing ball of lava on the end, at which point it suddenly develops the personality of an unruly child refusing to balance on one hip. You return to the glory hole, reheating the sphere from earlier. The furnace breathes its steady hum. The glass glows brighter, then softens like taffy. You rotate the pipe slowly, evenly, never stopping. It turns out, is a mistake. The gather will droop and warp under its own weight, like a sleepy pancake rolling off the griddle. Your arms burn a little. You're told this is normal. Renaissance glass blowers all had one stronger arm. Some had one slightly longer. Though that may be a historical exaggeration, you don't mind. You're too busy making sure your hot orb doesn't roll onto the floor and become an expensive, molten tragedy. Historians still argue whether the earliest use of the blowpipe in Murano was influenced directly by Syrian glassblowers or developed in tandem. Some documents suggest cross-Mediterranean inspiration. Others insist it was a purely Venetian innovation. You, meanwhile, just focus on not accidentally exhaling too hard and turning your bowl into a jellyfish. You take a slow, deep breath. Position the blowpipe to your lips and begin to blow, not like inflating a balloon, but like whispering a long, steady breath into the mouth of a sleeping dragon. The glass responds. The sphere expands, slowly, evenly. You keep turning, never stopping. The maestro watches you from the side, arms crossed. but his expression is unreadable. When the bubble reaches the size of a grapefruit, you lower it to the marver, a thick steel table where you roll it gently to shape the base. The heat dances just beneath the surface, colors shifting from orange to yellow. You can feel it through your gloves, even through your boots, like the whole workshop is gently vibrating to the pulse of your creation. A joke floats to the surface of your brain, something about dating in the Renaissance being easier if you could make your own wine goblets. You smother it. This is sacred work. After all, probably. One apprentice hands you jacks, long, tong-like pincers with flattened tips. You grip the neck of the form just behind the bubble, squeeze in lightly. The metal tools hiss against the hot glass, leaving a faint groove. You'll return to that mark later, using it to separate the piece from the blowpipe. But for now, you're still blowing. Another steady puff. The bubble grows again, thinning as it stretches. You adjust your breath, watching the shape widen slightly. The balance is exquisite. Too much pressure, and you get a warped disc. Too little, and the form stays stubborn and squat. A fringe detail from a dusty manuscript floats through your memory, an account of a Murano glassblower who claimed he could tell a person's personality by the shape of the first vessel they blew. Wide and shallow meant ambitious. Narrow and deep meant secretive. You try to guess what your current wobbling sphere says about you, probably terrified but trying. The maestro steps in now, nodding slightly. He holds out a tool called a tagliante, shears used to snip and trim. With a swift move, he helps guide the bubble into a more defined bowl. You follow the motion, pivoting your hands slightly, keeping the pipe spinning the entire time, always spinning. That's the rule burned into your bones. Another assistant, quiet as a shadow, glides up with a punty rod, its tip already warmed in the auxiliary furnace. Together, you prepare for the transfer, the moment of truth. Your glass form is too delicate to complete on the blowpipe, so you'll attach it to the punty to finish shaping the top. You breathe shallow now. No one speaks. The maestro uses the jacks to weaken the neck. Remember that groove, and with a tiny, confident tap, the form snaps free from the blowpipe and rests on the punty. Not a crack, not a shatter. You exhale slowly. Victory, small, warm, probably a little lopsided, but it's yours. The new end, formerly the bottom. Now the top glows like sunrise. You reheat it quickly in the glory hole, then return to the bench for shaping. The lip needs softening. The rim must be even. You use wooden paddles, soaked in water, to gently nudge it into place. The paddles sizzle and hiss, steam curling upward like incense. The maestro leans in and murmurs, "Breathe with your eyes." You're not entirely sure what that means, but it sounds wise, so you do your best. You stare at the wobbling edge, adjusting it gently, tracing each curve with your gaze. Your shoulders ache. Your arms feel like wet rope, but you keep moving. Historians today praise Murano glass, not just for its clarity and color, but for the geometry of its vessels. There's something mathematically graceful in every curve. You can now see that each bowl, cup, or vistas is the result of endless muscle memory, a conversation between breath, gravity, and temperature. At last, the maestro places his hand gently on your arm. Enough. You nod and return the piece to the annealing chamber, a long, warm kiln where glass cools slowly, over hours, cooling too quickly. As you've seen, leads to stress cracks, some invisible, some loud. You wipe your forehead with a damp cloth and sit on the bench, letting your muscles tremble. You've survived your first full form. The apprentices smile at you, quietly. It's not a celebration. It's more like nodding when a baby takes its first step. You're still going to fall plenty. But today, you stood. In the corner, you spot an old goblet, half covered in soot. It's lopsided, the stem awkwardly long, but it gleams faintly in the low light. Someone's first attempt, long ago. You wonder if there is still blowing glass, or if they left for Florence, or fell in love with an embroiderer and forgot all about silica. The maestro clears his throat, so you straighten up. The day isn't over, and the next task, adding color, is already being prepared. For now, though, you allow yourself a moment to rest, your hands still humming from the blowpipe's rhythm. You listen again to the furnace, to its breath, to your own. You blew life into fire and it didn't blow back. That's enough magic for one morning. Color, you discover, isn't just painted onto glass like a child's watercolor. It is built into the very bones of it, coaxed from crushed minerals, metal oxides, and ancient recipes that were often passed down with more secrecy than royal decrees. Today, you learn to stir the spectrum into life. The workshop grows quiet again as the maestro leads you to a long wooden table, pocked with burn marks and powdered with glass dust in hues of sapphire, olive, rust, and pale lemon. Trays of pigment sit neatly aligned, each labeled in a script so florid it might as well be dancing. You lean over to study them, resisting the urge to sneeze. One puff of air and these trays would become a Renaissance snowstorm. The maestro pinches a bit of cobalt oxide between his fingers and lets it fall into a shallow dish of clear, molten glass. Instantly, a swirl of blue begins to bloom, rich and moody, like ink dropped into warm water. He gestures for you to try. You reach for a different powder, manganese dioxide, the one said to give glass a subtle purple or smoky hue. Carefully, you add a pinch to your reheated gather, watching as the molten material shifts, darkens, and shimmers. Historians still argue whether these color recipes were more influenced by Islamic alchemical texts or local trial and error. Some suggest Venetian masters had access to trade routes that brought pigments from as far as Persia and sub-Saharan Africa, while others believe most colors came from mining efforts in Central Europe. Either way, the combinations were guarded closely, shared only between father and son, or, in rarer cases, between suspicious brothers. You stir with the punty slowly, delicately folding the pigment into the mass like sugar into thickened honey. The air smells faintly metallic, a little like burning coins and river mud. You imagine this is what a wizard's kitchen would smell like, if wizards had furnaces and aprons stained with iron oxide. A fringe practice you overhear from another apprentice involves sprinkling crushed lapis lazuli, actual semi-precious stone, into the batch for an especially vivid ultramarine. Only the wealthiest patrons could afford such decadence, and even then, only in minuscule amounts. The glassblower adds just a speck, like seasoning a priceless stew. Your current experiment looks promising. The glass glows like dusk, that in-between color somewhere between purple and storm cloud. You reheat it in the glory hole, then gently blow another form, this time a squat vase with an open mouth and thick rim. You spin and puff, then roll it on the marver to shape. It's imperfect, but alluring. You catch the maestro watching, and for a second, just a second, you think he's impressed. Color adds complexity, not just visually, but physically. Some pigments change the viscosity of glass, making it flow differently, behave differently. Cobalt stiffens it, chromium makes it too runny. You must adjust your breath, your pace, your tools. It's like learning to speak with an accent. The workshop holds a few finished examples. One shows delicate white threads embedded in red glass, a technique called latamo, or milk glass. Another has swirls of gold leaf trapped beneath the surface like an insect in amber. You trace one with your finger, marveling that something so fragile could hold so much fire. A joke passes around about an old maestro who supposedly drank wine only from red-tinted goblets because it made the drink taste richer. Scientifically dubious, perhaps, aesthetically persuasive. You quietly hope to reach a level of eccentricity, that elegance someday. Your next task is to create a streaked pattern by layering two differently colored gathers. First, a base of clear glass, then a thin overlay of green, achieved by adding iron and copper oxides. The maestro demonstrates the motion, a quick dip, a twist, then an even faster pull to stretch the colored layer thin. You mimic him. Your movements stiffer, slower. Your green layer comes out blotchy, more swamp than emerald, but it works. The two glasses fuse, and as you shape it, streaks form organically, like wind in grass, or algae stirred by oars. There's a quiet debate in the workshop over whether coloring techniques should aim for precision or spontaneity. Some masters plan their palettes meticulously. Others let the furnace decide. You feel yourself leaning toward the latter. There's something poetic about giving the fire a vote. You're handed a batuto tool next, an iron paddle used to gently tap and texture the surface of the piece. You create shallow divots that catch the light in unexpected ways. The glass, still warm, sings faintly as you work, a high, delicate ping each time iron meets surface. The maestro offers a faint smile. It looks like sunrise through fog, he says. You turn the piece in your hand. He's right. The streaks are soft, the dimples scattered. It's humble, and yet it glows. You set it aside, placing it on a padded cradle to cool slightly before annealing. Your arms ache again, but it's a different sort of ache, one that says you've added something rare to the world, a color no one else quite has. Looking around the room, you notice each artisan has a preferred palette. One favors rich burgundies and golds, another cool blues and seafoam green. Some lean toward glass so clear it could be mistaken for water. In Renaissance Venice, glass wasn't just about utility, it was identity. The shade, the clarity, the shimmer, it all said something about the hand that formed it. In the far corner, you spot an old bottle, a faded orange-red that seems to pulse in the light. Someone whispers it's made with selenium, a discovery centuries ahead of its time. Probably just workshop gossip. Still, you wonder? The maestro calls for a break, and you sit near the open door, letting the sea breeze cool your cheeks. Across the canal, a gondola glides by, the oar dipping silently into green water. You rest your eyes, not asleep, but floating. You think of color now not just as pigment, but as memory. Blue like yesterday's goblet, green like this morning's mistake, purple like the hush that falls before each blow. You return to the bench, fingers tingling slightly from the cooled tools, only to find something rather delightful waiting for you, a neat tray of colorful rods, each thinner than a pencil and glimmering with possibility. These are can di vetro, glass canes. Today, you're invited to try a technique that walks the tightrope between delicate mosaic and compulsive obsession millefiori, or 1,000 flowers. The name feels like poetry, and that's exactly what it is. You lean in to examine a cross section of one cane. Inside, a tiny flower, no bigger than a fingernail, made of fused layers of colored glass that reveal their pattern only when sliced. A single cane can contain a full bloom, petals, center, and outline, all hidden inside a nondescript rod until the blade reveals it. It's like slicing a jelly roll made of stardust. You begin with a basic gather of transparent glass on your blowpipe. The maestro gestures toward a tray where several warm canes lie in wait, each preheated to avoid thermal shock. You pick up one with a striped outer layer, blue, white, and emerald green, and gently lay it across the surface of your molten gather. It sticks instantly, like candy on caramel. More canes follow, laid one at a time, each adding to a circular pattern around the form. Soon, the piece begins to resemble a celestial garden, floral bursts frozen in time. Spiraling outward in gentle layers, you gently reheat in the glory hole, letting the pieces fuse without distorting. You roll the gather across the marver, smoothing it into a long cylindrical form. The pattern stretches. The flower blooms elongate into feathery trails, pulling toward the edges like sunbeams. You marvel at how much depends on tiny variations in angle and timing. It's both incredibly precise and just a little bit chaotic. Historians still debate whether millefiori originated in Alexandria and was later perfected in Venice, or if Murano's artisans rediscovered the technique independently. Fragments of ancient Roman millefiori glass have been found buried near the Tiber, but the Renaissance revival refined it into something breathtaking. The Venetians added symmetry, polish, and drama, transforming archaeological curiosity into art you could sip wine from. Your next challenge is Sur Reticello, a net-like pattern formed from latticed canes. It's fiddly, delicate, and absurdly difficult. You start by pulling a gather into a long cane. Once it cools slightly, you and another apprentice stretch it, each holding an end and walking backward until the glass is thinner than a shoelace. The cane cools instantly in air, hardening into something you could snap like a twig if you dared. You slice the cooled cane into tiny pieces using a brass blade. Each cross-section reveals a miniature window, symmetrical and dizzying. You arrange them inside a shallow mold, carefully placing each one next to the other like tiny tiles. This part feels more like embroidery than furnace work. Another joke floats through your head, something about glassblowers needing better hobbies, like knitting. You smirk to yourself, placing the final tile. The mold is then reheated until the tiles fuse into a sheet. This sheet is then picked up on a gather of molten glass, essentially wrapping the colored mosaic around the outside. The process feels like trying to put socks on a lava lamp. Doable, but ridiculous. You manage it barely. The pattern warps a little near the bottom, but the top blooms just as intended. You let it spin slowly in the heat, smoothing the seams and whispering to yourself as you go. You didn't mean to whisper. The room just makes you do it. A fringe technique, one apprentice tells you, involves twisting canes together while they're still glowing and slicing them before they set. The result is a hypnotic spiral that looks like peppermint, or maybe a galaxy caught mid-spin. You try this too, and the outcome is, well, chaotic, but not awful. In a hidden drawer, the maestro shows you a millefiori bead that dates back over a century. It's been passed down, he says, through half a dozen apprentices. The pattern is unmistakable, 12 petaled rosettes on a ruby red background. You marvel at how crisp the design still is, even after decades. Glass, it seems, has an excellent memory, but it's also a ruthless judge. One missed alignment, one uneven slice, and the whole flower becomes a smear. You find yourself staring at your latest attempt, trying to decide whether it looks more like a rose or a sunburned squid. Somewhere near the furnace, a glassblower drops a tool. It clatters, loud and sharp. Everyone freezes for half a second before breathing resumes. The maestro chuckles. Even flowers scream sometimes, he says. You set your completed Millefiori disc in the annular. It's small, colorful, and imperfect, exactly what it should be. You don't need 1,000 flowers yet. One blooming mess is enough for today. As you wipe your hands and step outside, you spot a child down the street, spinning a glass marble between his fingers. Inside it, a swirl of color, a trapped twist of light. You smile. Maybe someone in this workshop made it years ago. Maybe, years from now, someone will find one of your Millefiori beads in the back of a drawer and wonder how it was made. The sun's lower now, glinting off the canal, making the glass in your palm sparkle like it remembers every furnace it's passed through. You tuck it away, already thinking of your next bloom. The next morning arrives with the soft hiss of dew evaporating from clay roof tiles, and the clink of iron shutters opening to greet another day of quiet combustion. You're already awake. You didn't sleep much. The Millefiori patterns from yesterday spun through your dreams like wheels of candy caught in firelight. Today, you're ushered into a room off the main floor, windowless, stone-walled, and far quieter than the furnace hall. This is where the guild meets, not in the shouting kind of way, more in the please don't speak unless you're 65 and permanently sooty sort of way. On the wall hang scrolls, ledgers, and a rusting key, said to unlock an archive of secret formulas buried somewhere on the island. That last part's probably exaggerated, probably. Murano's glassblowers weren't just artisans. They were protectors of knowledge, and, at times, willing conspirators in what can only be described as industrial espionage prevention. The Arte dei Vetri, the Glassmakers Guild, controlled every aspect of the profession, from materials and training to marriage rights and off-island travel. You glance at a yellowed parchment framed on the wall. It's written in flowery Latin, but summarized bluntly if you try to leave Murano with your glass-making secrets. The penalty is exile, or worse, a one-way swim in the lagoon. Historians still argue whether these punishments were ever truly enforced, or if they were more bark than blowpipe. But one fact remains certain: the Republic of Venice valued glassmakers like nobles. Skilled ones were granted privileges, higher wages, the right to wear swords, and even marry into noble families. But they were also watched closely, a gilded cage, heated by flame. The maestro shares a story as he adjusts a ledger on the table. A glassblower in 1518 tried to sell mirror techniques to the French. He disappeared shortly after. Some say he fled. Others say the gondoliers rode him somewhere quiet. You're not sure which version to believe. Either way, you nod solemnly. The unspoken message: stay loyal or stay underwater. You return to your bench, a little more aware now of the weight of every tool. The blowpipe isn't just iron, it's inherited obligation. The furnace isn't just fire, it's silent testimony. You've joined something ancient, You're now part of the silence. A younger apprentice leans in and whispers about an old maestro who once buried his formulas in sealed glass globes and scattered them in the canal, claiming only those worthy would find them. It's a charming tale, part prophecy, part lunacy. You make a mental note to start scuba lessons in another lifetime. Despite the secrecy, certain practices are shared freely among the trusted, at least. You're handed a weathered notebook filled with diagrams, ratios, and margin scribbles. One recipe details how to make ruby glass using gold chloride. Another gives three competing proportions for soda ash, depending on humidity and furnace mood. You notice a fourth version scratched in later, as if someone disagreed but didn't want to argue openly. Some formulas are literal alchemy, others are superstition in disguise. One page claims that stirring the molten batch counterclockwise on Tuesdays prevents fogging. You glance at the maestro. It's Tuesday. You stir counterclockwise. No questions. A whisper-thin joke bubbles up. Maybe the guild rules were just elaborate ways to keep apprentices too paranoid to quit. But then again, every glassworker here seems married to the heat. No one talks about retirement, only cooling off. One peculiar guild law, still technically on the books, states that a glassmaker could not operate without at least 2 apprentices observing. The reason to prevent technique theft, or perhaps to ensure that if something exploded, someone was nearby to sweep. The workshops follow this still, mostly out of habit. You feel oddly reassured, knowing someone's always close, even if they don't speak. In the corner, locked behind iron bars, sits a chest, deep red wood with iron straps. It hasn't been opened in years. One apprentice says it holds fragments of glass made for popes. Another swears it contains a scroll listing the true origin of Cristallo. Both are probably wrong, but you like not knowing. Guildmasters, it turns out, could be summoned to inspect any piece of work if its quality was questioned. You imagine a small committee in soot-covered robes, squinting at goblets and murmuring about lip curvature and stem balance. You wonder how many careers ended over slightly off-center rims. A fringe anecdote tells of a competition held in 1483. 2 masters were tasked with creating the lightest wine goblet possible. One delivered a cup so thin it sang when you breathed near it. The other made one that shattered when the judge exhaled. The winner's goblet weighed less than a walnut. You imagine him lifting it with a single eyebrow raise. Rules were everywhere, but they weren't all cold. One guild tradition involved a toast after each apprentice's first solo piece, a glass of sweet vermouth sipped from the apprentice's own creation. You're not there yet, but the idea makes you smile. Back at the furnace, you now understand the hush. It's not just reverence, it's protection. Each artisan moves within their circle, guarded by routine, ritual, and trust. You see now how closely glassblowing resembled dance, choreographed, silent, dangerously beautiful. The maestro nods toward a wall where tiny hooks hold dozens of keys. Each one is tied to a wooden tag, etched with initials. Every tool locker, pigment drawer, and formula cabinet has its own key. You're given one. It's small, unassuming, and slightly warm. It doesn't open much, but it does say you belong here now. You tuck it into your apron pocket. It jingles faintly with every step you take. You don't know what secrets you'll one day guard, but for now, you know which ones you'll never speak. The door to the maestro's private bench creaks open at mid-morning, and you're summoned with a nod so subtle it could have been mistaken for a draft. This is the moment you've both hoped for and slightly dreaded working directly beside him. No assistance shielding your mistakes, no echo of your actions absorbed by a room full of other apprentices, just you, the maestro, and a single phrase murmured as you approach today. We stop looking and start listening. He gestures toward the bench. The tools are laid out like a surgeon's tray: blowpipe, jacks, shears, paddles, all polished to a dull gleam. You're handed a gather of clear glass, soft and glowing, and instructed not to blow, not yet. The maestro wants you to feel the glass first. You roll the gather slowly on the marver, listening to the sound it makes. It's not music, but it's not silence either. A gentle scrape, a whisper of heat touching metal. The maestro closes his eyes, as if tuning into a secret wavelength. Only glass speaks. Most people shape the glass with their hands, he says softly. But the glass also shapes your patience. He picks up his own pipe and demonstrates, barely moving, only tilting, turning, adjusting the angle by fractions of a degree. His gather flows perfectly, elongating without a single shudder. You try to mimic him, and your gather slouches into a sleepy cone. You're forcing it, he says. You need to negotiate. Historians still debate whether Venetian glassblowers viewed themselves as craftsmen or artists. In practice, the line was blurred. Many didn't sign their works, and the idea of individual fame was often secondary to the prestige of the workshop. Some even say the best glassblowers refused commissions if they felt the glass wasn't in the mood. That sounds dramatic. Until your own gather sags again, and you silently apologize to it. The maestro helps you reheat, this time. He instructs you to twist slightly as you gather, to let the molten ball center itself rather than wrangle it into place. You do. The result is smoother, not perfect, but cooperative. The maestro nods. You're learning to listen. He passes you a goblet to examine. It's old, centuries, maybe. The stem is impossibly thin, like a stalk of grass. You hold it up to the light. Inside, a barely visible swirl of color, as if the breath that shaped it had left a fingerprint. The maestro leans in. I made that when I was your age, he says. It's ugly. You blink. He grins faintly. But it taught me how not to fight the stem. There's a lesson there. Buried beneath the sarcasm, probably several. You return to the pipe and gather again, letting your motions slow. The glass rises willingly, twirling as if invited to dance rather than pushed onto the floor. You shape a small bowl today, modest, shallow, no embellishment. The maestro watches your hands more than the glass itself. At one point, he places his hand over yours, adjusting your grip slightly. Your fingers ache, your thumb cramps, but the bowl holds its shape. You breathe. That, he doesn't correct. A fringe legend says that in some workshops, glassblowers whispered lullabies to their pieces as they spun, not for superstition, but to help with breath control. You try it under your breath, thus humming gently. Your bowl listens. The maestro hands you a pair of shears and gestures for you to trim the lip. It's barely thick enough to need it, but you do so anyway, gently, not cutting, just nudging. The edge evens. You can feel the heat through the shears, radiant, pulsing, alive. Then comes the stem. The maestro sets up a new gather and places it on a prepared pad. You watch him stretch it slowly, then score it. The narrow segment becomes the stem of a goblet. balanced precariously atop the bowl you just finished. It's a delicate operation, like setting an egg atop a feather. You assist with the punty transfer. No cracks, no slips. Your fingers barely tremble. The maestro lifts the final product toward the light. It wavers slightly. Your bowl is a little off-center, but it holds. He tilts it. It doesn't fall. Ugly, he says, but honest. You smile. You'll take that. Historians love to cite the apprenticeship systems of Renaissance crafts, and the master-apprentice relationship was often formalized by contracts, sometimes even notarized. But the real education always happened like this, shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath, mistake to miracle. The paperwork never captured the way a maestro leaned in and murmured, "Hold your arms like you're cradling something delicate and feral." He tells you about his own mentor, now long gone, apparently. The man never spoke in full sentences, only gestures and scoffs. Still, the maestro credits him for everything. He once threw a goblet at a cardinal. He adds casually, then pauses. "Missed?" You laugh, nearly dropping your punty. He does not apologize for the joke. You appreciate that. By the end of the session, your back aches and your fingers are sore, but your hands remember new movements. So small, so precise, they don't feel like your own. You're starting to recognize the rhythm behind the spin, like riding a bicycle made of lava. With practice, it wobbles less. The maestro sets your goblet in the annular and claps you once on the shoulder. It's brief, barely contact, but it stays with you longer than expected. Later, as you tidy your bench, you catch the maestro staring at the piece again. He doesn't say anything, but he doesn't correct anything either, and that's enough for today. You spend the early afternoon becoming reacquainted with the tools, not the drama of the furnace, not the romantic breath of the blowpipe, but the quiet implements that do the actual shaping. They wait for you on the wooden bench, like a still life in iron-long jacks with polished beaks. Wooden paddles soaked dark from years of steam, and the mysterious marver, more than just a table. It's a stage, today's lesson. The maestro explains with the smallest flick of his wrist, is about precision, not color, not form, just contact. You must understand how every tool touches the glass, not what it does, how it whispers. You begin with the jacks. You remember them from earlier. Of course, those flat-bladed tongs used to pinch and guide. But today, instead of wielding them with hesitation, you watch how the maestro balances them in his fingers, not clamping down like a wrench, but easing them into the groove at the glass's neck. It's not surgery, he says. It's midwifery. You try the same motion. Your hand shakes slightly. You apply too much pressure. A crack forms, not catastrophic, just a faint one, like a warning drawn in steam. You rotate the pipe, watching your breath's creation throb with its own heat. This time, you let the jacks rest gently, as if you're convincing the glass to change shape rather than forcing it. The groove forms. The glass doesn't complain. Historians still argue whether the jacks, or Borcelle, were invented in Murano or brought from Germany. The design hasn't changed in centuries. They don't need to. What other tool can draw a goblet's waist tighter or flare its lip like a flower in bloom? You move next to the paddles. These are made of fruit wood, pear mostly, because it burns slowly and evenly, soaked overnight. The paddles hiss when they touch molten glass, releasing a puff of steam that smells faintly like old orchard soil and bonfire. You use them to flatten the base of a bowl, pressing gently as the glass spins. The friction is slight, the contact soft. It's not about force, it's about invitation. A light joke surfaces about the paddles being Murano's version of spa treatment. You let it sit in the air. The maestro chuckles under his breath. You're handed the taglianti next. Iron shears for cutting excess glass. They feel too heavy, too blunt. But the maestro demonstrates how to snip not with pressure, but with rhythm. A quick open close, like trimming herbs. You try on a trial gather. The cut is jagged. You adjust. The next is smooth. The maestro doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. You learn about the puntello, the punty rod. Again, its real trick is balance. Too cool and it won't pick up the piece. Too hot and it melts into the form. You start to develop a sense of temperature, not by reading thermometers, but by watching the color of the glow. Pale yellow means soft. Deep orange means fluid. If it's white, you've waited too long, or not long enough, depending on what you were hoping to do. In a nearby drawer, you find odd tools with even odder purposes. There's a set of curved tweezers used to pull glass into ridges like onion skin, a notched wheel for decorating rims, a long brass tube used to make tiny bubbles in a decorative pattern. For rich people who like their wine to sparkle, an apprentice mutters. A fringe detail the maestro shares. Some older masters carried personal tools for decades, refusing to let others touch them. One even buried his shears with him, demanding they be placed in his coffin like a knight's sword. You wonder briefly what your favorite tool will be someday. So far, it's the marver. It never burns you. It just listens. You're assigned a task now shaping a small bottle with a narrow neck. This is where the jacks shine. You gather, blow, marver, reheat, then pinch. You rotate constantly, making the neck thinner, longer, until it looks like the stem of a daffodil. One wrong move and the whole piece will collapse inward. You blink sweat from your lashes and keep turning. At one point, your jacks slip and you correct mid-motion. The maestro watches. He doesn't stop you. When the piece finally detaches, you lay it in the annealer, heart pounding, and sit back. The jacks still buzz in your fingers. Another apprentice is working nearby with soffiati, small glass bubbles blown for chandeliers. She uses only tweezers and breath. Her hands are so precise, she could pluck eyelashes with iron. You watch, mesmerized. She sees you staring and smiles faintly, then returns to her work. Tools here are personal, almost sacred. Apprentices clean and oil them at the end of each day. Some wrap their jacks in cloth as if tucking in a pet. There's a rumor, half believed, that a maestro can tell who touched his tools just by how they sit on the bench afterward. You learn to listen to the tools, the slight scrape of jacks on cooling glass, the hiss of paddles, the dry click of shears. Each sound tells you something. You start reacting before the maestro speaks. He notices. He says nothing. Historians often overlook this part, the quiet hours between flames, where the glass isn't shaping you by spectacle, but by nuance. No colors, no blooms, just balance. You return your tools to the bench, wipe each one down. You run your fingers over the edge of the marver. It's cool now, smooth, like it forgot what burned on it an hour ago. The maestro taps his own jacks once, lays them on the bench, and walks away. You don't follow. You know that part was your test, and you passed, not with brilliance, but with steadiness, and sometimes That's what the tools want most of all. The maestro meets you at the door just before the sun crests the tiled roofs of Murano. He's holding a stemmed goblet, delicate as breath, and hands it to you without a word. You hold it gingerly, careful not to tighten your fingers. The base wobbles ever so slightly. It isn't perfect, but that's not the point. Today, you're tasked with making one of these. Not a bowl, not a vase, a full goblet with a foot, stem, and cup. You will make it stand, and it will not fall. That's the challenge. You spend the early hour gathering clear glass, watching it melt and bead, practicing the rhythm of roll, blow, turn, reheat, repeat. The maestro stands nearby, arms folded, offering no advice unless you ask. He prefers silence when shaping goblets. Too many voices, and the glass gets nervous. You gather your first bubble, shaping it into the bowl. It starts wide, wider than needed, but better to trim than stretch. You marver it gently, reheating as necessary. You make the lip thin, but not razor sharp. You remember the lesson from earlier. Goblets should be drinkable by the wind. Whatever that means, you spin and breathe. The bowl takes shape. It's not symmetrical, but it holds. That's enough for now. Next comes the punty transfer. You gently reheat the base, score the neck, and tap. It breaks clean. You move fast, sticking the punty to the base, spinning as you go. No hesitation, no wobble. Then, the stem, the hardest part, the most unforgiving. You gather a small amount of molten glass, enough to stretch into the spine of the goblet. You touch it to the bottom of the bowl, pull gently, then let gravity help. The stem forms like a droplet held in prayer. You breathe, your hands shake, you reheat. Historians still debate when exactly the Venetian goblet achieved its final form. Some claim it was in the late 1400s, others argue for mid-1500s. Regardless, by the Renaissance high point, the Venetian chalice was world-famous impossibly thin, perfectly balanced, and absurdly fragile. Princes collected them. Popes commissioned sets, well, not to drink from, but to own. Your own goblet wobbles on the punty. You adjust the base, flattening it with the paddle. The stem is slightly off-center. The maestro says nothing, but you feel the weight of his glance. You reheat again. The second attempt goes better. The stem rises like a reed. The bowl sits straighter. You shape the foot, wide, flat, circular. You tap the punty free, a clean break. It doesn't tip. It stands. You exhale, almost laughing. It's not perfect. It lists a little to the left, like it's had a long day. But it stands. One fringe tradition says that in some workshops, apprentices had to make a dozen standing goblets before they were allowed to drink from one. You wonder how many fell over in the process, or shattered mid-toast. The maestro walks over, lifts your goblet with 2 fingers, and holds it to the light. The base is thick, the lip is uneven, but he tilts it, nods faintly, and hands it back. Next one should be thinner, he says. You try again. This time, you focus on breath control, less pressure, longer rotation. You narrow the stem even more, this time trying for that signature Venetian elegance. It trembles on the punty. You brace, you finish, you anneal. By late afternoon, you've made 3. The first stands like a drunk. The second sways gently. The third, not perfect, but proud. You line them up on a tray, and they gleam in the fading light. Not beautiful, perhaps, but honest. You notice the other apprentices comparing stems, nodding approvingly at each other's work. One has added a tiny glass ring mid-stem, a flourish known as a nodo. You ask how. They shrug, trial and error, mostly error. You try one, It flattens into a lump. You laugh. The maestro smirks. Even the best spill wine. In a quiet corner, you find a glass blower shaping a goblet so thin it hums when he taps it. You watch him work, noting how his hand barely moves. It's not about speed, it's about stillness. You ask the maestro what makes a goblet perfect. He thinks for a moment. Balance, as he says. It should look like it's breathing, just enough to stay upright. That night, you dream of standing goblets, an army of them, each quivering slightly on an invisible breeze, waiting to be filled with something important. Wine, maybe, or pride. You arrive the next day to a quiet clatter, glass shattering somewhere just beyond the workshop's open arch. No one flinches, no one swears. A few heads turn, then return to their work. Just another moment of failure that came a little too early, or a breath too strong. You learn fast in a glass blower's life. Breaking things is as normal as shaping them. Today is devoted to mistakes, not dramatic explosions or flying shards, just the slow, inevitable failures that happen when the timing's off, when the glass cools too fast, when you forget to rotate for 1 second too long and your beautiful stem bows like a reed in the wind. The maestro greets you by setting a cracked goblet on your bench. The foot is warped, the bowl leaning dangerously to one side. What went wrong, he asks. You inspect it like a detective at a crime scene. The neck is too narrow. The glass cooled unevenly, probably twisted before the final reheat. You say all this, and he nods. Then, to your surprise, he tells you to remake it, exactly as broken, not to fix it, to understand it. Historians still argue whether Renaissance glassmakers tracked their errors systematically or simply developed instinct through repetition. No journals of failures have survived, only near-perfect pieces held in museums. But every master, you're told, has a shelf of shame, and every apprentice, a bucket. You're handed a punty rod and a fresh gather of glass. The pressure is interesting. You're not aiming for perfection. You're aiming for the exact same mistake. It's strangely liberating. You roll and blow, then intentionally allow the gather to sag slightly off-center. You underheat the foot. The stem bends a little too early. You create an echo of yesterday's flawed goblet. It cracks in almost the same place. You smile. That, somehow, feels like progress. There's a tradition in the workshop when a piece shatters during finishing. The apprentice who dropped it must sweep it up in silence, then carry the shards to the courtyard, where they're added to the pile of cullet, waste glass that will one day be reborn in a fresh batch. You do this today. Your first cracked goblet gets the honor. The pile sparkles under the sun, like frozen confetti. Blues, greens, golds, failures refracted into beauty. You return and try again. The maestro hands you a thin tool called a piastra, a small paddle with a tapered edge, used to level stubborn rims. You wield it with care, tapping a lip that's cooling too fast. A faint ping tells you the stress line is growing. You stop, you reheat, you wait. Glass punishes urgency. The maestro murmurs. You nod. That's something you've now seen firsthand. Nearby, another apprentice knocks a finished vase against the marver. A soft, musical crack. It looks fine for 3 seconds. Then, a clean split runs from top to base. The entire workshop exhales together. He shrugs and drops it into the failure bucket. A fringe story gets passed around. One master kept a log of every piece that cracked, noting time, weather, even his mood. His journals were so detailed, Some say he could predict breakage just by sniffing the morning air. Others say he went mad from overmeasuring. You decide not to start a log just yet. You focus on the annular now, the long, slow oven where pieces rest for hours to cool evenly, if cooled too quickly. Internal stress builds up invisibly. The glass looks perfect until it's tapped or picked up, and then it snaps like dry spaghetti. You're allowed to monitor the annealer for the afternoon. It's warmer than expected, like standing beside a sleeping dog made of stone. You check each piece, sliding them gently deeper into the chamber or pulling them back toward the opening for controlled cooling. You whisper to one that seems anxious. No one judges. Historians praise Murano's annealing techniques as one of the reasons their glass was so much stronger and clearer than others. Some even suggest that the secret was not just chemistry, but rhythm, the slow choreography of temperature. You find a cracked goblet from earlier today, still cooling but clearly wounded. A hairline fissure creeps down the bowl. You leave it. If it survives, it'll be yours. If it doesn't, well, it joins the pile. The maestro checks in once, pointing to a cooling vase. That one he asks. You nod. He shrugs. Could survive. Could explode tomorrow. That's glass. It's not just the product that breaks here. Hands blister, fingernails crack, aprons catch fire, apprentices leave. Glass doesn't apologize. It's not cruel. It's just honest. You begin to see beauty in that. One apprentice shows you her left hand, burned along the knuckle. From a stem that popped, she explains. She didn't leave. She just started wearing gloves. You ask the maestro if he's ever made the perfect goblet. He snorts. Once? Then I dropped it. Everyone has a story like that. And still, they gather. Still, they blow. Still, they try again. You spend the last hour of the day making a simple cup. No stem, no base, just form and breath. It cools without cracking, not perfect, but solid. You don't name it, but you nod to it, small, quietly. That's how you make peace with mistakes. You let them burn, you let them cool, and then you try again with softer hands and steadier breath. Late afternoon in the workshop means polish and preparation when the morning's creations, cooled in the annealer, are finally brought into the light for final inspection, refinement, and, for the lucky few, their journey into the hands of nobility. Today, you're handed a cloth and a tray of goblets. Time to meet your elders, the maestro mutters, pointing you toward the finishing table. Some pieces here will be boxed and shipped to Florence or Padua. Some will be stored for wealthy Venetians to inspect during their endless gift-giving rituals, and some will sit quietly on display, never used, never toasted with, just admired. The glassblower, of course, gets no name on the base, but you start to understand why that doesn't matter. One of your goblets sits there too, the third one, the one that stood without swaying. You lift it, checking for stress marks, for tiny bubbles caught near the lip. You see none. It's not flawless, but it's proud. You buff it gently with a cloth made of worn linen. The surface catches the light and tosses it back gently, like a compliment. You glance to the other end of the workshop. There, a small crate is being filled with finished glassware wrapped in straw. These pieces are headed for Rome, for the cardinal's table. You won't know who made what, but you helped shape the hands that shaped them. Historians still debate how many Murano pieces survive in collections today. Some estimate thousands. Others suspect many were misattributed or melted down in later years. Venetian glass traveled not only across Europe, but into the Ottoman court, through trade routes that carried sugar, silk, and whispers. Murano glass was Venice's ambassador, silent, glittering, impossible to counterfeit. Your role today is to inspect a special commission, a set of 12 matching glasses, each subtly tinted with iron oxide to give a soft rose hue. You check for consistency. Are the stems the same length? Do the bowls sit at equal heights? You line them up like sentries and squint from one end to the other. One is slightly tilted, barely noticeable, the kind of flaw only a glassblower would notice and never mention. You adjust its angle, let it pass. The maestro watches you but says nothing. A fringe belief lingers in the workshop that glass intended for nobility should contain one minor flaw. To avoid angering the gods, perfection invites misfortune. A crooked rim becomes an offering. You clean the pieces, careful not to leave fingerprints. You use a soft brush to dust the crevices of filigree. One piece, a bowl, has a lacy edge shaped with toothed jacks, curled like the hem of a silk gown. It catches light in little loops. You turn it slowly, admiring the shadow it casts, a quiet joke from an older apprentice. You polish like you're apologizing. You grin. Maybe you are. The maestro calls for a weight test. You step to the scale, a simple balance with brass pans. Each goblet must fall within a specific range to meet the client's expectations. Too heavy, and it's clumsy. Too light, and it feels cheap. You place yours on the left pan. A matching standard sits on the right. The beam tips slightly, just barely. You remove it and check again. Dust. A fleck of glass. You try again. Balanced. Approved later. You're asked to polish a mirror plate. A flat disc of cristallo. The famed ultra-clear glass developed right here in Murano. You hold it to the light, marveling at how it contains almost no color, no clouding. It reflects your face with alarming honesty. No fog, no flattery. This is the glass made for popes and princes, not for their wine, but for their walls. Historians trace the development of cristallo to the early 15th century, when Murano artisans discovered a method of purifying ash and silica to remove color almost entirely. It wasn't just chemistry, it was philosophy, clarity as virtue. The maestro tells you about a commission from a Hungarian nobleman decades ago. A chandelier, 8 tiers, 300 blown elements. It took 6 months to assemble and nearly as long to ship without damage. No one knows if it ever made it there intact, but it left here perfect, he says. You ask how often the finished pieces are signed. Never, he replies. That's the trick. The piece speaks for itself. The hand behind it doesn't matter. You try to believe him. But part of you wants someone to know this goblet was yours later. You assist in packing. Each item is swaddled in straw, then wrapped in linen. Crates are nailed shut with care. One piece slips. You catch it. You whisper to it, just in case. A final crate remains, bound not for a palace, but for a merchant's wedding gift. Inside are modest tumblers, clear and unadorned, except for a tiny swirl caught near the base of one. You like that one best. It has a memory. As the sun dips toward the lagoon, you carry the crate to the dock. The gondolier loads it carefully, nodding once. The glass is no longer yours. It never was. But for a few hours, you held it. And now it moves through the world, quiet and shining. The next day begins with something different. No gathering, no blowing. Instead, the maestro leads you to the mixing room, a quiet, chalk-dusted corner of the workshop where the ingredients of glass are measured, weighed, and whispered into being. You're here to learn the raw chemistry behind the clarity, the part that no patron ever sees. On a low table lie sacks of crushed quartz, small barrels of soda ash, and curious tins filled with powder, lead oxide, lime, potassium nitrate, and others with less familiar names, calcina, tartaro, and sabia levigata. You notice a little soot on each container, like these elements have already passed through fire, even before touching flame. Glass, the maestro says, begins long before the furnace. It begins here, with the mixture known as the batch. The standard recipe for Murano Cristallo calls for extremely pure sand, finely ground, mixed with soda ash from plant sources like barilla or alga marina. The maestro opens one tin and lets you sniff. It smells faintly briny and sharp, like coastal soil and antique vinegar. You're given a ledger, a heavy book with stained pages, detailing past batches. Some are precise to the gram. Others read more like riddles. Add soda until it sighs. One note says, if the sand clumps, it dreams too much. Probably poetic flair. Probably. You begin with the sand. It must be pure, washed, dried, and sifted to remove iron or organic material. Impurities darken the glass, give it that greenish hue often found in medieval goblets. The maestro prefers the sand shipped in from the Ticino River Valley, known for its low iron content. He pours a small amount onto a black plate. It gleams, pale gold with flecks of pearl. Next, you measure the soda ash. This lowers the melting point of the mixture, making it more workable in the furnace, also a little too much, and the glass becomes cloudy, too little, and it resists shaping. Like a sulky dough, you add it slowly, watching the grains sink into the sand like they're nestling in. Historians still argue whether Venetian soda ash came primarily from imported Syrian sources or was processed locally from seaweed and coastal plants. Some even speculate the guild imported ash secretly and disguised the barrels. Smuggling minerals is not a glamorous crime, but it's apparently very profitable. You add lime, calcium oxide to stabilize the mixture, preventing the glass from dissolving in water over time. That was a problem once, centuries ago. A whole shipment of glass plates slowly melted into soup during a humid Venetian summer. You stir carefully, then. The maestro gestures to a small vial of lead oxide. Used sparingly, it can make glass softer, more sparkly, more pliable. You add just a pinch, too much, and it yellows the mix, just enough, and it glows. A fringe anecdote claims that early Murano chemists have tested clarity by setting a lit candle behind a pane of cooled glass. If the flame was visible without distortion, the batch was perfect. If the flame wavered, the whole crucible was dumped and begun anew. You glance at a single candle burning near the window now, just in case. Once your batch is mixed, you carry it slowly to the furnace. The maestro opens the crucible chamber. Inside, the air warps like a mirage. You shovel the batch in with deliberate care. The sand hits the floor of the crucible and begins to fuse immediately. Not melt, yet, but sink and soften. This process takes hours, sometimes overnight. You'll return later to stir it gently with the punty, folding it until the grain becomes a mass. You stare for a while at the glowing mound, marveling that this recipe, so simple, so granular, will eventually become something that captures sunlight in the palm of your hand. One apprentice jokes that it's like baking a cake that could kill you if you breathe in too hard. You smile behind your sleeve. You turn to a corner of the room where failed experiments sit in silence. One block of glass is cloudy, veined with green. Another turned pink when too much manganese was added. The maestro keeps them as reminders. The ingredients don't lie, he says. They just need translation. There's a bucket near the door labeled unknown. Inside are pieces with strange hues: olive gray, ghostly white, opaque sea blue. No one remembers how they happened, but they're kept just the same. One day, someone may want to fail that way again, on purpose. The maestro shows you a sliver of glass he calls false crystal. It looks like crystal, but it's soda lime glass polished to deception. Renaissance workshops used it to fill orders when the real Cristallo was too expensive. It's technically honest, just not very proud. You return to the mixing table and begin a new batch. This time, you add a small amount of antimony, an opacifier. The resulting glass will turn cloudy, good for white beads or cameo blanks. The maestro nods. Clarity is not always the goal. Outside, the bells of Venice begin to chime. The day is almost done. You wipe your hands and stare at the tray of raw ingredients. Sand, ash, minerals, all so ordinary. And yet, tomorrow, they will shimmer. You close the ledger gently. You've memorized the page you wrote on, not because it's yours, but because it might someday become something worth holding up to the sun. As the sun climbs behind the tiled roofs and dances off the canals in soft gold, whispers ripple through the workshop, murmurs of glassmakers in the north, of distant kilns firing in cold valleys, of rival hands working in unfamiliar rhythms. Today, for the first time, you hear the name Bohemia spoken not as a place, but as a warning. The maestro gestures for you to follow him. He walks briskly toward a side room lined with glassware unlike anything you've handled. These aren't your workshop's delicate goblets or feathery bowls. These are thick-walled, etched, and brilliant Bohemian glass, clear as conscience and sharp as memory. You pick up one piece, a sturdy goblet with deep diamond cuts along the stem. It's heavier than what you're used to, and colder, less breath, more blade. Bohemia, now part of the modern Czech Republic, emerged during the late Renaissance as a serious contender in the world of glassmaking. Historians still argue whether the region's rise was sparked by intentional knowledge theft from Venetian artisans or by independent experimentation fueled by abundant natural resources. Either way, the rivalry has teeth. The maestro flicks a finger along the rim of a Bohemian piece. The ring it produces is long and resonant, like a struck bell in a winter forest. Your own goblet would hum softer, lighter. They sing differently, he says. What made Bohemian glass special was its recipe potash-rich soda, mined from beechwood ashes, and a healthy dose of chalk. The result, a crystal-clear body, perfect for deep engraving. The northern climate demanded sturdier glass. The artisans responded with boldness. You learn about Hochschnitt, the high-cut technique used to engrave glass deeply enough that designs stand out in relief. Florals, coats of arms, hunting scenes. It's not subtle, it's impressive. You stare at one goblet with a stag leaping through brambles, its antlers catching the light like spears. Venetian glass, by contrast, is a whisper. Bohemian glass is a shout, and the market heard it. A fringe tale floats around the benches, one of a Venetian apprentice who fled north, fell in love with a Bohemian girl, and taught her father the formula for Cristallo. The story ends differently depending on who tells it. In one version, they open a workshop and live happily ever after. In another, she sends the formula home in a hollowed out rosary bead. In the third, they're both poisoned with bad wine. You pick your favorite. The maestro opens a drawer and pulls out a strange hybrid piece, a goblet with a Venetian bowl and a Bohemian stem. It's awkward, like someone merged a sonnet with a drinking song, but it's compelling. You wonder what kind of person would drink from this. You return to the furnace, and he challenges you to replicate the Bohemian shape. Thicker walls, more structure, a wider base. You gather more material than usual, roll it slower, keep the heat higher. It resists your movements, though, like a bull under silk. You puff, shape, and marver. The result is solid, heavy, almost angry. You begin to understand why the Bohemian glassmakers carved theirs. Venetian pieces didn't need carving. They danced in the light. But this wants something cut from it. Your arms ache from the extra mass. You set the piece aside and stretch your fingers. The maestro watches, silent. You know he's seen better. You know this isn't the kind of glass that sings in his language. Still, you ask him quietly, "Do you hate it?" He pauses, then shrugs. "No, I just don't speak it." Later, over a shared bowl of broth and bread, he tells you that the Bohemians changed everything. By the 17th century, they were exporting engraved glass faster than Murano could ship goblets. Their workshops didn't have the secrecy, but they had the forests, the fuel, the stone, the will. Some Venetians adapted, others mocked, and a few quietly learned. You glance at your earlier Millefiori piece, now resting on a shelf beside a Bohemian tumbler. They look like two different species, same material, different dreams. Another apprentice leans in and tells you a fringe opinion that the rivalry kept both traditions alive. Without Bohemia, Venice might have grown complacent. Without Venice, Bohemia might have made only windows. You return to your bench and start a new form. This time, not trying to replicate Bohemia, but to acknowledge it. You build a wide-based bowl, then add a thin stem like a whisper. North meets south, fire meets frost. It won't change the market, but it might change your hands by evening. The maestro places your hybrid piece next to others. He doesn't say much, just a faint nod. And one comment: balance isn't always in the middle. The gondolas drift by in the canal, their lanterns flickering in reflection. You imagine somewhere, far away, a Bohemian glassmaker finishing his own day, carving a deer into crystal, wondering how the sunlight looks in Murano. Just after sunrise, before the main furnace has fully woken, you're summoned to a quieter corner of the workshop, one you've rarely entered. Here, no large blowpipes clang, no crucibles hiss, no goblets spin into existence. Instead, soft tapping, coiling flames, and the steady rhythm of breath being held and released. This is the lampworking room, and today, you're about to learn from the quietest masters of all the women. Technically, they shouldn't even be here, officially. Murano's glass-blowing guilds did not permit women as full members, but exceptions grow in the spaces where silence is strong enough to let skill speak. Widows, daughters, sisters, they learned in shadows, behind walls, beside furnaces that remembered everything. What they made wasn't large, but it was exquisite. You're introduced to Signora Diletta, a woman in her 60s with hands as small as bird wings and eyes that have clearly seen hundreds of apprentices pretend they know how to hold a torch. She doesn't offer you a chair. You'll be standing today, Lamp working, she explains, isn't about brute heat. It's about focus. Here, small rods of glass, filigrana, are heated with a flame fed by bellows and alcohol. Instead of spinning a heavy blowpipe, you manipulate threads of color thinner than string, using tweezers, pins, and patience. Historians still argue whether women's contributions to Murano glassmaking were minimized deliberately or simply lost to time. Some guild records mention household production or supporting decoration, vague phrases that conceal entire legacies. But here, in this corner, those legacies glow orange. You watch Deletta melt the tip of a cobalt rod. It flares gently, softening into a glistening bead. With impossibly steady hands, she wraps a thin yellow stringer around the surface, then flicks it with tweezers, creating a perfect spiral in seconds. She offers you the torch next. You sit, she decides you're allowed now, and lift the rod with tweezers, holding it at the edge of the blue flame. It takes longer to soften than you expect, and when it does, it sags suddenly, like warm candy on a hot day. You panic, twist too hard. The glass folds in on itself, the pattern ruined. Again, she says simply, this is a different rhythm, not the loud breath of blown vessels, not the choreography of spinning bowls. This is embroidery, tactile, precise, wholly unforgiving. A fringe tale she shares involves a woman named Julia, who once made a chess set entirely out of lamp-worked glass, each pawn a flower, each bishop a flame. No one knows where it ended up. Deletta shrugs. Some say it melted in a house fire. Some say a pope bought it and hid it. You try again. This time, your hand steadier. The red rod softens. You lay down a single loop of green. It's lopsided, but visible. Deletta nods. Around you, the shelves are filled with tiny masterpieces, earrings shaped like gondolas, perfume bottles smaller than thumbprints, fish with opalescent scales, and millefiori eyes. Many were sold in markets to tourists, passed off as trinkets. But their craft is no less real than the goblets shipped to royalty. You try sculpting a tiny bird. It becomes more of a squash with wings. Still, the flame didn't scare you this time. Historians now begin to uncover letters and inventories listing unnamed female assistants who handled coloring, stringing, and miniature shaping. Their fingerprints are everywhere, on beads worn by duchesses, on bracelets buried with merchants' wives. The hands that made them were simply never asked for signatures. Deletta shows you her family's toolkit, wrapped in embroidered cloth. Inside are 3 tweezers, 2 broken but cherished, and a pointed brass tool used to shape loops in earrings. It belonged to her great-grandmother. Still works, still bites if held wrong. She lets you try the pointed tool. You create a small flower, clear glass with a tiny yellow center. It bubbles slightly, imperfect. But you don't drop it. She places it beside the others, doesn't say if it's good or not. Later, she speaks more softly. We didn't make chandeliers, but we lit them. That line stays with you. The maestro visits briefly, nodding to Deletta with a mix of respect and deference. He doesn't interfere. He knows this is her domain. He studies your little flower, raises one eyebrow. You're not ready for earrings, he says, but maybe buttons. Deletta smirks. Before you leave, she gives you a millefiori bead, yellow petals and clear glass. This one, she says, was made on a day when everything went wrong, except this. You tuck it into your apron, back in the main room. The furnace glows brighter now, but you feel different returning to it, as if you've seen the quiet nerve center beneath all the flash. Not all glass screams with color and flame. Some of it whispers in spirals. Some of it fits in the palm. Some of it holds stories no one bothered to record. And now, you've heard them. The sun is low now, casting long shadows across the canals and flooding the workshop with amber light. The maestro is waiting near the anile, where your most recent goblet rests inside, cooling slowly, like an idea you're not quite ready to say aloud. But tonight is not about shaping. Tonight is about watching something finish. He leads you to the final chamber, the muffala, the cooling oven that cradles glass after its time in the flame. The heat here is softer, the kind that strokes the skin rather than stings it. It's a room of patience, not precision. The pieces here are neither molten nor cold. They're in between, like dreams right before waking. You kneel beside the chamber and peer through the small window. Inside, pieces from today rest on clay pads, their colors muted, their shapes still holding a ghost of warmth. Yours is among them, a goblet with a slightly narrowed lip and a lean toward the left, as if it's listening to something you can't hear. The maestro opens the hatch, just enough to reach in with iron tongs. He lifts your piece and holds it up to the fading light. The glass no longer glows, but it remembers glowing. You can see it in the way the stem hums faintly when touched, the way the bowl catches the sunset and holds it there for a breath longer than nature would allow. He sets it on a padded tray. You take it gently, your fingers wrapping around the stem the way they did when it was still fire-soft and trembling. You've made other goblets this week, some better, some more balanced, but this one feels finished. Historians still argue whether Murano's annealing techniques were copied elsewhere or remained a closely guarded mystery. Some say the secret was simply the pace, the unhurried cool, the refusal to rush. Others suggest special bricks, unique mineral compositions, even Venetian sea air playing a role in the gentle descent from liquid to solid. No one agrees, but every piece that's ever lasted centuries went through a muffala like this. There's a bucket in the corner labeled finale. It holds pieces too flawed to sell, too finished to destroy. Your goblet doesn't go there. It goes into a wooden box lined with straw. Its future undetermined, but its journey, yours, complete. A fringe workshop tradition says that the final piece of each apprentice's trial week is shown only to the furnace, not the maestro, not the guild, just the flame that knows your breath. So, before the box is sealed, you step to the furnace and hold the goblet before its open mouth. It catches the glow again, just for a second, and you whisper, not a prayer, just a thank you. You look around the workshop one more time, the paddles hanging like old shields, the marver streaked with soot, the cooling chamber humming softly, the beads and canes stacked in their wooden trays, and everywhere, the quiet presence of things that once moved like honey and now sit like stone. The maestro rests a hand on your shoulder. No speech, just pressure, a nod. You've listened, you've waited. You've learned not just how to shape glass, but how to let it shape you. Now the workshop fades, the heat dims, the tools rest. You imagine the furnace slowly exhaling, its core softening from orange to red, then finally to a deep and silent black. The annular still hums, but it too is growing quieter with each passing minute. Outside, the canal laps gently against the stone steps. A gondola passes, the ore dipping soundlessly into silver water. The air smells of salt and ash. Above, a single lantern swings faintly in the breeze, casting a shifting glow across the window pane, almost like molten glass in slow motion. You sit back in your mind now, your hands no longer gripping iron, no longer balancing the impossible. Your arms rest beside you. Your breath settles. You remember the weight of the blowpipe, the hiss of paddles, the voice of the maestro, and the even older voice of the flame itself. Your goblet has cooled. You have too, in the stillness. You hear the rhythm of the workshop, now slowed, like a heartbeat in sleep. It's all still there, waiting the pile of cullet, the trays of pigments, the drawer of unknowns, the bead in your pocket. The story isn't over. But for tonight, it's resting. Let the weight of the day melt away. Let your breath match the pace of cooling glass. Slow, steady, silent. Each inhale softens the edges. Each exhale lays the piece to rest. The fire has gone quiet now. The tools are still. And you can sleep.